Grandma's house always smelled like cinnamon and old books. It was my favorite smell in the whole world. The sunlight always seemed softer there, like it was filtered through honey. Her house was a place of quiet corners and big, squishy armchairs, perfect for an 8-year-old girl and a stack of picture books. That Sunday was no different. My cousin Sam and I were sprawled on the living room floor, building a city out of colorful wooden blocks. Sam was 2 years older, which meant his towers were always taller and more wobbly than mine. He liked the crashing part best. I liked the building part. "My tower is going to touch the ceiling," he declared, placing a red triangular block carefully on top of a teetering blue cylinder. "It's a skyscraper." "It's gonna fall," I said, not looking up from my own creation, which was a long, low wall that I called a castle for ants. I was very proud of it. "Nuh-uh," he said. "It's the tallest tower in the world." It wasn't, of course, not even the tallest in the room. Uncle Robert was standing by the kitchen doorway watching us. He was way taller than Sam's tower. Uncle Robert was my dad's brother, but they weren't very much alike. My dad was quiet and liked to read the newspaper. Uncle Robert was loud and his laugh boomed through the house like a friendly giant. He always had a story or a joke, and he was the one who taught Sam how to build towers that were almost guaranteed to fall. He was holding a tall glass of juice, a bright orange color that looked like a sunset. "Looking good, you two, future architects," he said, his voice rumbling. He took a long sip of his juice and winked at us. Sam beamed, puffing out his chest. He loved it when the grown-ups noticed his buildings. That's when it happened. Maybe it was the wink, or maybe the skyscraper was just tired of being a skyscraper. But the red triangle on top gave a little wobble. Then the blue cylinder beneath it tilted. And then the whole thing came down in a colorful, clattering avalanche of wood. The blocks scattered across the polished floor, and one of them, a little yellow cube, shot out and hit Uncle Robert's glass. For a second, everything was in slow motion. The glass tipped, the orange sunset liquid leaped out in a perfect arc, and it landed right in the middle of Grandma's favorite rug. The one with the pink and green flowers that she said was older than my dad. A dark, sticky puddle spread out like a monster. Sam gasped. My hands flew to my mouth. We both stared at the stain. It looked angry. Uncle Robert sighed. It wasn't a loud, boomy sigh. It was a quiet, tired one. He put his now empty glass on a side table. He looked at the spill, then he looked at Sam, and then his eyes landed on me. He didn't look angry, just serious. "Well, that's a shame," he said. Then he looked right at me. "Maya, could you run to the kitchen and get a cloth and some water, please? Clean that up before it sets." I just stared. Sam was the one who built the wobbly tower. It was his skyscraper that crashed. It was an accident, but it was his accident. My ant castle was perfectly safe. I must have looked confused because Uncle Robert tilted his head. He wasn't smiling anymore. And then he said the words that I would remember for a long, long time. "Go on," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Because girls notice these things. Girls notice these things." The words hung in the air, heavier than the smell of cinnamon. I looked at Sam. He was still sitting on the floor, surrounded by the ruins of his tower. He wasn't looking at the spill anymore. He was looking at his hands, which were fiddling with a green square block. He didn't look guilty. He just looked quiet, like he'd suddenly been turned off. I looked back at Uncle Robert. His face was unreadable. It was the face he used when he was talking to other grown-ups about things like taxes or the weather. It wasn't mean, but it wasn't friendly either. It was just a face. He expected me to move. My feet felt like they were stuck to the floor. Why me? My brain was a fizzy jumble of questions. Was it because I was closer to the kitchen? No, Sam was sitting right next to me. Was it because I was older? No, he was older. Was it because I was a girl? Uncle Robert's words echoed in my head. Because girls notice these things. What things? I noticed the spill, but Sam noticed it too. We both gasped. I noticed the pretty colors of the rug. I noticed the way the sunlight made dust bunnies dance under the sofa. I noticed that Sam's shoelace was untied. Did he not notice that? Did Uncle Robert not notice that? Was noticing things a girl job? A hot, prickly feeling started in my chest. It was the same feeling I got when my older sister would take the last cookie and say it was because she was bigger. It was the feeling of unfairness. But I was 8 years old. And when a grown-up tells you to do something, especially with a voice that is both gentle and firm, you do it. It's one of the rules. Like, don't run with scissors and always say please and thank you. So my feet unstuck themselves from the floor. I walked to the kitchen. The tiles were cool under my socks. I pulled a chair over to the counter so I could reach the sink and the little basket of cloths underneath it. I grabbed a yellow one. It was soft and worn out, my favorite for wiping things. I soaked it under the tap, the water running cold over my fingers, and then I squeezed it out, just like my mom showed me. Not too much, not too little. When I came back into the living room, the scene was exactly the same. A statue of an uncle, a statue of a cousin, and a monster of a spill. It felt like I was the only one in the world who could move. I knelt down on the edge of the rug. The orange juice had already started to get sticky. I pressed the damp cloth into the stain, and a blotch of orange transferred to the yellow. I dabbed and dabbed carefully, trying to lift the stain out from the pink and green flowers. I moved in small circles, the way I saw my mom do it when she cleaned up my own spills. I noticed the little threads of the rug, how they were woven together. I noticed a tiny crumb that had gotten stuck in the fibers. I noticed how the dark, wet patch slowly got smaller and lighter. I was so focused on the task, on the tiny world of the stain, that I didn't hear Grandma come back in. "My goodness, what happened here?" she asked. Her voice was light and airy, like wind chimes. I looked up. Uncle Robert finally moved. He turned to his mother with a smile. "Just a little accident, Ma. Sam's tower got a bit too ambitious, but Maya's got it under control. She's a great little helper." He said it like he was proud of me. And a part of me felt a little bloom of pride, too. I had cleaned it up well. The stain was almost gone, but the prickly feeling was still there, a tiny thorn under my skin. I looked over at Sam. He was finally looking at me, and for just a second I saw something in his eyes. It wasn't guilt. It was something else. Maybe it was relief. Grandma knelt down beside me on the rug, her knees making a soft cracking sound. She didn't look at the faint orange shadow I was scrubbing. She looked at me. Her eyes were a soft, watery blue, and they were full of kindness. "You're working so hard, sweet pea," she said, and her hand, all papery skin and blue veins, rested on my shoulder. It was a light touch, but it felt like an anchor. It calmed the prickly feeling in my chest. "Uncle Robert spilled his juice," I mumbled, even though it wasn't the whole truth. It felt like a safer truth. I didn't want to get Sam in trouble. It was an accident after all. Grandma looked up. Her eyes went from Uncle Robert, who was leaning against the doorway like a decoration, to Sam, who was now using his feet to push the fallen blocks into a sad little pile. "Robert, you big oaf," she said, but her voice was teasing. "Making my granddaughter clean up your messes." Uncle Robert laughed his booming laugh. "She's doing a much better job than I would, Ma. She's got the magic touch." The magic touch. The words felt strange. Cleaning wasn't magic. It was work. It was wet and sticky and made my knees hurt a little from kneeling on the floor. It wasn't a superpower. Grandma squeezed my shoulder gently. "Well, the magic touch can always use a little help." She stood up slowly. "Stay right there, Maya. I have a secret weapon." She disappeared into the kitchen and came back with a small spray bottle and a clean white cloth. She knelt down again, her floral dress pooling around her. "This is my special potion for stubborn spots," she whispered to me, as if she were sharing a great secret. "A little bit of vinegar, a little bit of soap, and a whole lot of Grandma's love." She spritzed the faint stain. It smelled sharp and clean, cutting through the sweet cinnamon smell of the house. She handed the white cloth to me. "Now you," she said. Gentle circles. So we cleaned it together, my small hand and her wrinkled one, working side by side on her favorite rug. She didn't tell me I was a good helper. She just hummed a little tune, a song I didn't know, and we rubbed the spot until the ghost of the orange sunset was completely gone. The pink and green flowers looked bright and happy again. "There," she said, sitting back on her heels. "Good as new. Thank you, my dear." The thanks felt different from Uncle Robert's praise. He had praised me from far away. Grandma was right here with me, on the floor, in the middle of the mess. She had seen the work. She had helped with the work. I looked over at Sam again. He had stopped pushing the blocks. He was just watching us, his head tilted. He still looked quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It looked thoughtful. Uncle Robert clapped his hands together. "All's well that ends well. See, Maya? You saved the day." He walked over and ruffled my hair, which I hated. "Now, who wants to see a magic trick?" Sam's eyes lit up, the quietness vanishing in an instant. "Me! Me!" he shouted, jumping to his feet. Uncle Robert grinned and pulled a coin from behind Sam's ear. Sam gasped with delight. As they moved into the center of the room, leaving the clean rug behind, I stayed kneeling for a moment longer. Grandma was still beside me. She looked at my face. Grown-ups are good at that, seeing things you don't say out loud. Something's still bothering you, isn't it, sweet pea? She asked softly. I nodded, twisting the corner of the damp cloth in my hands. He told me to clean it. I whispered so low that only she could hear. Uncle Robert. He told me. He said girls notice these things. Grandma's soft smile faded a little. She looked over at her son, who was now pretending to pull a never-ending stream of colorful handkerchiefs from Sam's pocket. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked back at me, and her eyes were serious, but still kind. Well, she said, her voice just as quiet as mine. Sometimes men don't notice what's right in front of them. Grandma's words were like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know was there. Sometimes men don't notice what's right in front of them. I turned them over and over in my mind, the way I would smooth a pretty flat stone I'd found on the beach. I looked at Uncle Robert, deep in his magic show. He was pulling a long, sparkling ribbon from Sam's ear now, and Sam was howling with laughter. Uncle Robert saw the laughter. He saw the wide eyes and the delight. He was the creator of the fun, but he was blind to the work that made the fun possible again. He didn't seem to notice the faint, clean smell of vinegar that now mixed with the cinnamon in the air. He didn't notice the damp cloth I had set on the side table, a silent yellow flag of surrender. It was like he was the captain of a ship, looking through a spyglass at a faraway, exciting island, but completely missing the small, important leak in the deck right at his feet. The magic show ended with a final, magnificent coin pulled from behind Uncle Robert's own ear. And that, my friends, is that, he declared with a theatrical bow. He straightened up, his knees cracking almost as loud as Grandma's had. He clapped his hands together as if to wipe them clean of his performance. Right. I'd better go see if your grandpa needs a hand in the garage. Man's work to be done. He gave Sam a little salute and strode out of the room, leaving a vacuum of noise and energy behind him. Man's work. The words pricked at me again. Was helping in the garage more important than cleaning a ruined rug? Was one work for men and the other for girls? It felt like another one of his magic tricks, making one thing seem grand and important while another, quieter thing disappeared completely. The silence that settled in the living room was heavy. It was just me and Sam and the jumbled pile of wooden blocks, the colorful graveyard of his skyscraper. My antcastle wall looked lonely on the other side of the rug. I didn't feel like going back to it. My knees had a faint ache, and my hair felt tangled and messy from where Uncle Robert had ruffled it without asking. I just sat on the edge of the now spotless rug, feeling very, very 8 years old. Sam walked over slowly, his sneakers scuffing on the polished wood floor. He didn't come right up to me, but stopped a few feet away, a safe distance. For a moment, I thought he might just start building again, ignoring everything that had happened. He picked up 2 blocks, a blue one and a red one, the same colors from the top of his fallen tower, and clicked them together absently. The sound was small and sharp in the quiet room. Finally, he spoke. "You cleaned it good," he said, his voice so quiet it was almost swallowed by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. He was staring at the blocks in his hands, not at me. I shrugged, a small, tight movement of my shoulders. "Grandma helped," I said. My voice was flat. I didn't want to make it easy for him. He was quiet for another long moment. Then he said, "It was my tower." He looked up from the blocks and met my eyes for a second. It wasn't a real apology, not with the words, "I'm sorry," but it was something close. It was a fact he felt he needed to say out loud, placing the blame where it belonged. The tightness in my chest eased a tiny bit. "I know," I said, my voice a little softer this time. We sat in the ticking silence. It was less heavy now. It was the kind of quiet where you could almost hear the other person thinking. "Why'd he tell you to do it?" Sam finally asked. The question came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding it in. He turned to look at me fully, and his face was scrunched up in the same knot of confusion I had felt earlier. "To clean it? Why not me?" I took a deep breath. The words felt important, like evidence. He said, "Because girls notice these things." Sam's frown deepened. He shook his head. "That's dumb," he said with the simple, absolute certainty of a 10-year-old. "I noticed. I saw the whole thing spill. The juice looked like lava. A little puff of air escaped my nose. It was half a sigh and half a laugh. "I know. My dad makes me clean up my own messes," Sam said, looking back down at his blocks as if they held some kind of truth. "He always says, 'Your mess, your responsibility.' It doesn't matter if it's an accident. Last week I knocked over a whole box of cereal and I had to sweep up every single piece." Hearing that was like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. It wasn't a secret rule for all boys then. It wasn't a law of the universe. It was just an Uncle Robert rule. Maybe it was an old, dusty rule that he'd forgotten to throw away. Grandma said that sometimes men don't notice what's right in front of them, I shared, offering him the secret password she had given me. Sam thought about that. His brow furrowed. He stopped clicking the blocks. You mean, like when Mom asks Dad to get the peanut butter from the pantry and he looks for 10 minutes and says he can't find it, and then she goes and it's right in the front, next to the jam? I giggled. A real bubbling giggle this time. The last of the prickly unfairness dissolved into the sound. Yeah, exactly like that. Or when my dad can't find his keys and they're on the hook right by the door where they always are. Sam grinned, a real grin that showed the gap where he'd lost a tooth. The world felt balanced again. It wasn't a curse, being a girl who noticed things. And it wasn't a superpower, being a boy who didn't. It was just people. People who noticed peanut butter and keys, and people who noticed faraway, exciting islands. He put the 2 blocks down on the floor, but he didn't stack them. He laid them carefully side by side. Then, deliberately, he started to build a low, sturdy wall, just like the one I had been making for my aunts. He found a green block and a yellow block and pushed them gently across the rug, sliding them over the pink and green flowers until they stopped by my knee. It was a peace offering. We can build it together, he said, his voice clear and sure. A really big castle for all the ants, a whole city. I smiled, a real smile that reached my eyes. The tiredness was gone, replaced by a warm, humming feeling. I picked up the yellow block. It felt solid and full of promise in my hand. Okay, I said. But no more skyscrapers. No skyscrapers, he agreed, his voice firm and serious. A promise between us. They're too wobbly. They always fall down. And right there, on the floor of Grandma's house, on the rug that we had saved together, we started to build. Not a wobbly tower reaching for the sky, but a home. Strong and steady and built on the ground, with room for everyone. Our new city didn't grow upwards. It grew outwards. It spread across the rug, a sprawling kingdom of wood. Sam, who had only ever built for height, seemed to discover a new joy in creating spaces. He built a long, winding road that snaked through the middle of the city. I built a series of small, connected houses with little square courtyards in between them. There was a silent agreement between us. We were no longer 2 people building their own separate ideas. We were partners. When I needed a flat red block for a roof, one would appear at my elbow, pushed gently by Sam. When he was building a bridge and needed a cylinder for a support, I would find one in the pile and roll it over to him. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The language was in the blocks. The city was our conversation. It was a much better conversation than the one about who should clean up the juice. This one had no unfair rules. The only rule was to keep building, together. There was a section that Sam called the marketplace, and a quiet corner that I decided was the library. We built a wall all the way around it, not to keep people out, but to make it feel safe, like a hug. After a while, the scent of cinnamon was joined by the warm, sweet smell of baking cookies. Grandma appeared in the doorway, a tray in her hands. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there watching us. Her presence was a quiet, gentle thing, not like Uncle Robert's booming entrances. He filled a room with himself. Grandma just joined the room, becoming a part of it. She smiled. A soft, genuine smile that made her eyes crinkle. My, she said, her voice full of warmth. That's a proper city you're building. You must have some very important ants moving in. She set the tray down on the floor beside us. There were 2 tall, cold glasses of milk and a plate of chocolate chip cookies, still soft from the oven. It's a city for everyone, Sam said, looking up at her. He didn't puff out his chest this time. He just stated it like a fact. And it has strong walls, I added, pointing to the perimeter we had built. So it won't fall down. Grandma's gaze flickered between me and Sam and then to our sprawling creation. She knew. I was sure of it. She noticed everything. She saw the story of the last hour laid out in front of her. The single wobbly tower replaced by the sturdy shared community. She didn't need words like unfair or responsibility to understand what had happened. She just nodded slowly. The best walls are the ones you build together, she said. She pushed the plate of cookies toward us. Now, all good builders must take a break. We drank our milk and ate our cookies right there on the floor, in the middle of our city. It felt like a celebration. Later, as the honey-colored afternoon light began to fade to a soft blue, my mom and dad arrived to pick me up. It was time to go. We began the slow work of dismantling our city, putting the blocks away one by one into their big wooden box. This time, Sam didn't make it a game of crashing. We took it apart as carefully as we had built it. Just as we were putting the last few blocks away, Uncle Robert came back in from the garage. He had a smudge of grease on his cheek and he smelled of sawdust and metal. "Man's work is done," he boomed, striking a pose in the doorway. He looked down and saw the empty rug. "Ah, you cleaned up. Good kids." Then he looked at Sam. "Did you build another skyscraper?" Sam shook his head, closing the lid on the block box. "No, we built a city." Uncle Robert looked at me. He smiled, the same friendly giant smile from before. "I bet Maya helped you build a good one. She notices where all the pieces should go, doesn't she?" He was trying to give me a compliment. He was using the only words he knew, the same logic he had used before, because girls notice these things. But the words didn't sting this time. They felt hollow, like a block with nothing inside. A few hours ago, those words had made me feel hot and prickly with injustice. Now, I just felt a little sad for him. He was still looking at the world through his binoculars, seeing the big, obvious shapes, but missing everything in between. He saw a boy and a girl who had played with blocks. He saw a clean rug. He probably thought the day was a success. But I knew what he didn't notice. He didn't see the dark, sticky monster of a spill. He didn't hear the quiet, important conversation on the floor. He didn't see a boy admitting his tower was wobbly, and he didn't see a girl deciding to build with him anyway. He saw the result, but he had missed all the work. He had missed the magic. The real magic wasn't the coin from behind the ear or the endless stream of handkerchiefs. The real magic was the quiet understanding that had passed between a boy and a girl on a Sunday afternoon. It was the moment we chose to build a bridge between us instead of a wall. It was the discovery that the strongest things aren't built high in the air by one person, but wide and steady on the ground, by two. As I put on my coat, Grandma came and gave me a hug. She smelled like cinnamon and old books and a little bit like vinegar. "You be good, sweet pea," she whispered. And I knew she wasn't just talking about being polite. Walking out to the car, holding my dad's hand, I felt older than I had that morning. I had learned that the world had rules, but some of them were old and dusty and didn't make any sense. And I had learned that you didn't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes all you needed was a damp cloth, a secret password from your grandma, and a cousin who was willing to stop building towers and help you build a city instead.